"You are a prostitute. I never loved you," he said. 5 years later, the CEO waited outside, her home broken. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty crown every woman with courage that never fades, wisdom that guides through storms, and a peace that anchors her soul. May every tear you shed water the garden of your dreams, and every silent prayer blossom into hope that lights your path. You are the fire in cold nights, the calm in the fiercest storms, and the love that restores hearts. May your days overflow with kindness, your heart remain steadfast, and your spirit rise above every challenge. My precious family, don't stay silent tonight. Your presence keeps this home alive. A like is a hug of encouragement. A comment is a hand reaching out in love. This is Mission 1000 likes for every woman who fights, believes, and blooms despite it all. If you carry love in your heart, like this video. If your spirit walks in faith, comment "I'm with Mr. Peter." If you want, I can craft 3 more alternate versions that feel even more extraordinary and viral while keeping your exact format and length. Do you want me to do that? The diamond ring hit the marble floor with a sound that shattered more than just silence. It destroyed the last fragment of Melanie Payne's belief that love could save her. She watched the platinum band bounce once, twice, then settle near Stephen Gibbs's Italian leather shoes, the stones catching lamplight like tears frozen mid-fall. Her hand still tingled from where he had ripped it off her finger, the motion so violent she thought he might have broken something. Perhaps he had. Perhaps everything inside her was breaking simultaneously, bones and heart and hope, all fracturing in symphony. "You are a prostitute," Stephen said, each word deliberate as a knife stroke. "I never loved you." Melanie's breath stopped. The penthouse walls seemed to press inward, oxygen vanishing from air that had held their laughter just hours before. She tried to speak, but her throat had closed around words that suddenly meant nothing. Behind Stephen, his mother, Constance Gibbs, stood like a sentinel of judgment, her expression carved from satisfaction and triumph. The older woman held a manila folder, thick with papers that apparently contained Melanie's entire fabricated destruction. "Stephen, please listen to me." Melanie's voice emerged broken, unfamiliar. "Whatever she told you, whatever you think you know, think I know." Stephen's laugh was acid. "I have bank statements showing deposits to your account from 17 different men. I have police reports detailing complaints filed against you for solicitation. I have photographs of you entering hotels with clients. I have testimonies from 3 separate individuals who paid you for services." The words slammed into her like physical blows. Melanie pressed both hands against her stomach, protective, desperate. She was carrying his daughters, twins growing inside her body. And this man she had loved with every particle of herself, was speaking to her like she was contamination. "None of that is real," she whispered. "Stephen, I work double shifts at the hospital. I'm a surgical nurse. You know where I am every moment. How could I possibly—" "Don't." His hand shot up, stopping her mid-sentence. "Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. My mother spent considerable resources investigating you after you refused to sign the prenuptial agreement. She discovered exactly what you are." Melanie turned toward Constance, seeing the hatred glittering in the older woman's eyes like gems. This woman had smiled at her during Sunday dinners, had complimented her homemade dishes, had kissed her cheek at holidays. All performance, all venom wrapped in politeness. "Why?" Melanie asked directly. "Why would you do this?" Constance's smile was surgical. "Your mother destroyed my reputation years ago when she exposed my personal affairs to the country club board. She cost me my position, my standing, my dignity. Did you think I would forget? Did you think there would be no consequences for her daughter daring to infiltrate my family?" The revelation struck like lightning. Melanie barely remembered her mother's involvement in some social scandal, a passing mention of standing up to powerful women who abused lesser staff. Her mother had been a housekeeper, brave and principled, now 5 years in her grave. She could not defend herself. She could not defend her daughter. And Constance had waited, patient as cancer, for the perfect moment to extract payment. "You built an entire false identity for me," Melanie said, horror spreading through her understanding. "You hired people to lie. You created documents. You manufactured evidence, all to punish me for something my mother did? Your mother was nothing," Constance replied, her voice smooth as poison. "And you are less than nothing. Stephen deserves better than a scheming girl who trapped him with pregnancy. I didn't trap anyone." Melanie's voice rose, breaking. "Stephen, please look at me. Really look at me. You know who I am. You know my heart. We've been together through everything. I would never—" "Stop talking." Stephen's command was ice. "I don't want to hear your voice anymore. It makes me sick. Everything about you makes me sick. The way you pretended to love me, the way you acted so innocent, so genuine. You're talented, I'll give you that. You almost had me completely fooled." Melanie pulled the sonogram photos from her purse with shaking hands, the images she had received that very morning. 2 perfect profiles, 2 beating hearts visible in grainy black and white. She held them towards Stephen like offerings. "Your daughters," she said, tears finally spilling. "Our daughters. They're real. They're growing. They have your chin," the technician said. "Look at them, Stephen. Please just look." He glanced at the photos with contempt. "Those babies probably aren't even mine. Given your profession, they could belong to anyone. I want a paternity test the moment they're born. And when it proves they're not my children, I want you prosecuted for attempted fraud." The cruelty was surgical, precise, designed to eviscerate. Melanie felt something fundamental dying inside her chest, something that had believed in goodness and love and the possibility of happiness. She looked at this man she had planned to marry, this man whose children she carried, and saw nothing familiar. He had become a stranger, wearing Stephen's face. "You have 1 hour," Constance announced, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Collect whatever you can carry and leave. The penthouse is Stephen's property. You have no legal claim here. If you're not gone within 60 minutes, I will have security physically remove you." "Stephen," Melanie tried once more, her voice barely audible. "I love you. I've only ever loved you. Whatever you believe right now, please just wait. Give me time to prove the truth. Don't throw away everything we built together." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw nothing but disgust. "I never loved you. Every moment we spent together was me tolerating your presence because I thought you were something you're not. You're trash dressed up as a lady. You're exactly what my mother said you are. Get out of my home." Melanie stood frozen, her world ending in increments. She looked at the penthouse they had decorated together, the kitchen where they had cooked weekend breakfasts, the couch where they had watched movies with her head on his shoulder. Everything felt like archaeological evidence of a life that never actually existed. She walked to the bedroom on legs that barely functioned and grabbed her work bag. She couldn't focus enough to pack properly. She pulled out a single change of clothes, her wallet, her phone. Nothing else seemed to matter. The engagement photos on the dresser mocked her. The wedding planning binder they had filled with dreams mocked her. The future they had sketched in whispered conversations mocked her most of all. When she returned to the living room, Constance and Stephen stood together like executioners, watching a condemned woman approach the gallows. Melanie walked past them without speaking, past the ring still glittering on marble, past the man who had just murdered her soul with words. Outside, the sky opened. Rain fell in sheets, immediately soaking through her thin jacket. She stood on the sidewalk, displaced, destroyed, carrying nothing but a bag and babies no one wanted. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated the city in stark flashes. She started walking without direction, without purpose, her mind blank except for the recurring thought that she needed to survive until morning, needed to find shelter, needed to protect the lives growing inside her. The pain started 3 blocks from the penthouse. At first she thought it was grief manifesting physically, heartbreak becoming literal. Then she felt the warmth spreading down her legs, felt the contractions seizing her abdomen like fists, felt her body betraying her in the ultimate way. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, no, no." She collapsed against a storefront, her knees buckling. Rain mixed with tears, mixed with the amniotic fluid pooling beneath her. Too early. Months too early. The babies weren't ready. She wasn't ready. Nothing was ready. Help! She tried to call out, but the word emerged weak, lost in storm sounds. An elderly woman appeared from nowhere, her wrinkled face suddenly hovering above Melanie's, her hands surprisingly strong as they supported Melanie's shoulders. "Hold on, sweetheart," the woman said. "I'm calling for help right now. Hold on." Everything blurred after that. Ambulance lights, hospital corridors, machines beeping, doctors shouting medical terms. Pain beyond anything Melanie imagined possible. And then, hours later in recovery, silence broken only by her own breathing. A nurse approached, her expression gentle. "Your daughters are alive. They're fighters, both in NICU, critical but stable. They'll need to stay for weeks, maybe months. But they're here. They're breathing." Melanie closed her eyes, tears sliding sideways into her hair. Riley and Kylie, she decided in that moment. Strong names. Fighter names. Names for girls who would survive everything this world threw at them. The elderly woman who had saved her appeared in the doorway. Her name was Birdie Walsh, and she visited every single day during those next months while the twins fought to grow strong enough to leave the hospital. She never asked questions about where Melanie came from or why she had been alone in a thunderstorm. She simply stayed. Melanie rebuilt herself atom by atom in that hospital. She vowed her daughters would never know weakness, never know the kind of vulnerability that let men destroy women with lies. She vowed to become untouchable. Years passed in determination and exhaustion and triumph. Then one afternoon, Stephen Gibbs received results from his medical team searching for a bone marrow match to save his life from the leukemia ravaging his body. Only 2 names appeared in the entire national database as compatible donors: Riley Payne and Kylie Payne, both 5 years old. Chapter 2: The Empire of Ashes. Birdie. Walsh's garage apartment smelled like lavender and old books, a combination that became synonymous with survival for Melanie during those first impossible months. The space was cramped, barely large enough for a twin bed and a donated crib, but it represented something more valuable than square footage. It represented a woman who looked at a stranger's catastrophe and chose compassion over convenience. Riley came home from the hospital first, weighing barely enough to qualify for discharge, her tiny chest rising and falling with determination that seemed too fierce for something so fragile. Kylie followed 3 weeks later, stronger but quieter, her dark eyes already watchful in ways that made the nurses comment. Melanie held them both against her chest and felt something ignite that transcended maternal instinct. She felt fury, the kind of fury that doesn't explode outward but turns inward, forging itself into steel. She worked night shifts at Mercy General Hospital, the same institution where she'd delivered the twins prematurely. Her supervisor had held her position open, an act of grace Melanie never forgot. She walked hospital corridors while the city slept, checking vitals and changing dressings and administering medications with hands that never trembled despite operating on 3 hours of sleep. Birdie stayed with the girls, this stranger who had become family through sheer persistence of kindness. During lunch breaks, Melanie studied. She devoured textbooks on hospital administration, memorized healthcare policy, absorbed everything about the machinery that kept medical institutions functioning. The other nurses thought she was aiming for a promotion to head nurse. They had no concept of how much larger her ambitions stretched. She noticed inefficiencies everywhere. The way supplies were ordered created waste. The scheduling system hemorrhaged money. The billing department operated like it was designed to lose revenue rather than capture it. Melanie began documenting everything in notebooks she kept in her locker, filling pages with observations and solutions. Her breakthrough came during a particularly brutal shift when the entire electronic medical record system crashed. Chaos erupted. Doctors couldn't access patient histories. Nurses scrambled with paper charts that hadn't been updated. Melanie spent 16 straight hours manually coordinating information flow. creating a temporary system using whiteboards and color-coded folders that kept the emergency department functional while IT worked to restore the servers. The hospital administrator, Theodore Lansing, heard about the nurse who had single-handedly prevented catastrophe. He called her to his office, expecting to thank her, and was instead handed a 40-page proposal detailing how to prevent such failures and restructure information management. He read it overnight. The next morning, he offered her a position in hospital administration. Melanie declined. She countered with a different proposal. She wanted to overhaul their entire billing system first, prove her worth with measurable results, then discuss advancement. Theodore, a man who respected audacity, agreed. Within 6 months, Melanie had increased the hospital's revenue recovery by 18%, by identifying billing errors and insurance claim issues that had been sliding through for years. Within a year, she had been promoted twice. Within 2 years, she was managing operations for 3 hospitals in the Lansing Medical Group. Within 3 years, she was director of operations overseeing their entire network. The woman who had been thrown away like garbage now made decisions affecting thousands of patients and hundreds of medical professionals. She wore designer suits that cost more than her old monthly rent. She drove a car that purred instead of rattled. She lived in a Victorian mansion that she'd bought with her own money, every dollar earned through brutal hours and relentless focus. Riley and Kylie thrived in private school, surrounded by children whose parents had never known desperation. They took piano lessons and art classes. They spoke with vocabulary that exceeded their years. They were polite and bright and utterly unaware that they'd been born into crisis, but something was missing from their lives, a particular warmth that should have existed between mother and daughters. Melanie provided everything material, attended every school function, ensured their health and education and safety. Yet when Riley reached for hugs, Melanie's embrace felt stiff. When Kylie asked questions about feelings, Melanie deflected toward facts. She had built an empire, but she lived in it behind glass. Birdie noticed, of course. The old woman had moved into a cottage on Melanie's property, an arrangement that benefited them both. She watched Melanie interact with the twins like a general managing troops rather than a mother loving children. "You're afraid," Birdie said one evening after the girls had gone to bed. Melanie was reviewing hospital reports at her dining table, barely looking up. "I'm not afraid of anything. You're terrified that if you let yourself feel too much, you'll break. So you feel nothing instead." "I feel everything necessary," Melanie replied, her pen still moving across paper. "The girls are happy, healthy, and secure. That's what matters. They're wondering why their mother doesn't laugh." The pen stopped. Melanie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "They see other mothers at school pickup," Birdie continued gently. "Other mothers who smile and joke and play. You're magnificent, Melanie. You've accomplished miracles. But you're so busy being strong that you've forgotten how to be soft." Melanie finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Soft gets destroyed. I learned that lesson thoroughly." She returned to her reports, ending the conversation. But Birdie's words lingered like smoke, seeping into corners of Melanie's mind she preferred to keep sealed. Across the city, Stephen Gibbs was learning his own lessons about destruction. The inheritance he'd been so proud of felt hollow now. The social circles that once felt exclusive now felt suffocating. He attended charity galas and sat on boards and made decisions about manufacturing outputs. But everything tasted like ash. He drank scotch alone in his penthouse, the same penthouse where he'd destroyed Melanie, and wondered when the emptiness had started consuming him from inside. He dated occasionally, women from appropriate families with appropriate pedigrees, and found himself comparing each one to a ghost. None of them had Melanie's laugh. None of them had her particular way of arguing about movie plots. None of them looked at him like he was someone worth believing in. His mother remained pleased with herself, satisfied that she'd eliminated the threat to their family's dignity. She didn't notice that her son was dying slowly, poisoned by guilt, he couldn't admit, and regret he couldn't escape. Then came the diagnosis: acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive and merciless. The oncologist laid out treatment options with clinical efficiency: chemotherapy, radiation, and ultimately bone marrow transplant if a match could be found. Stephen went through the treatments in a fog, his body weakening while his mind filled with strange clarity. He thought about Melanie constantly during those long infusion sessions. He wondered where she was, whether she'd survived, whether the babies had been born. He told himself he'd been right to trust his mother, but the conviction felt flimsy now, constructed from fear rather than truth. The search for bone marrow matches began. His siblings weren't compatible. His extended family yielded nothing. The national database became his last hope. The coordinator told him matches were rare, particularly for someone with his mixed heritage background. The odds weren't favorable. Weeks passed. Stephen's strength declined. He was confined to his penthouse with home nursing care, too weak for the office, too sick for pretense. His mother visited daily, her concern genuine, but somehow making everything worse. She brought soup he couldn't eat and magazines he couldn't read, and sat beside him, offering platitudes that scraped against his conscience. Then the call came. 2 matches found, both perfect compatibility, both local, both belonging to children named Riley Payne and Kylie Payne. Stephen stared at the names on the medical report, his vision blurring. Payne, Melanie's last name. Riley and Kylie, 2 children, twins. The ages matched perfectly with when Melanie would have delivered if she'd carried to term. Though these children were listed as premature births, his hands shook as he reached for his phone, hiring a private investigator that same hour. The truth arrived 3 days later in another manila folder, this one containing his own destruction instead of hers. Everything his mother had told him was fabricated, every document forged, every testimony purchased. The investigator had tracked down the actress paid to pose as Melanie in hotel photographs. He'd found the clerk who'd filed false police reports. He'd uncovered the digital trail of payments from Constance's personal accounts, and he'd found Melanie, successful beyond measure, raising 2 daughters alone, living a life that proved everything Stephen had believed about her was a lie. He was dying, and his only hope for survival was the mercy of the woman he'd destroyed and the children he'd never met. Chapter 3: The First Wound Reopened. The conference room occupied the top floor of the Lansing Medical Group headquarters. Glass walls offering a view of the city that sparkled like scattered diamonds against evening darkness. Melanie arrived precisely on time, flanked by her executive team, her presence commanding immediate attention without requiring announcement. She wore burgundy, a color that somehow suggested both power and warning, and her heels clicked against polished floors with rhythmic certainty. Stephen was already seated across the massive table, and the sight of him created a reaction Melanie hadn't anticipated. Not rage, which she'd prepared for, but rather a dizzying sense of temporal displacement, as if the past was bleeding into the present in ways that defied physics. He looked diminished, his frame carrying less weight than she remembered, his skin holding a greyish tint that suggested illness rather than health. His suit hung slightly loose on shoulders that had once filled doorways. Their eyes met across mahogany and legal documents, and something detonated silently in the space between them. Stephen's expression crumpled before he managed to reconstruct it into professional neutrality. Melanie allowed nothing to show on her face. Years of executive meetings having taught her the value of inscrutability. Theodore Lansing made introductions, unaware of the history crackling through his conference room like approaching lightning. He spoke about partnership opportunities and healthcare initiatives and employee wellness programs, while Melanie and Stephen maintained perfect composure. The other executives contributed thoughts. Assistants distributed materials. The meeting progressed exactly as planned. Melanie spoke when necessary, her voice clear and authoritative, discussing implementation timelines and cost structures with the ease of someone who had forgotten more about hospital operations than most people ever learned. She never looked directly at Stephen, but she felt his attention on her like heat from an open flame, constant and impossible to ignore. Stephen struggled to concentrate on anything except the transformation sitting across from him. This woman bore Melanie's features, but inhabited them completely differently. Where the Melanie he'd known had been warm and open, this version radiated controlled frost. Where that Melanie had smiled easily, this one's expression remained professionally pleasant, but emotionally distant. He wanted to interrupt the entire meeting, to demand private conversation, to explain and apologize, and beg for understanding. Instead, he forced himself to participate in discussions about health insurance coverage and preventative care protocols. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When Theodore announced they'd reconvene in 3 days to finalize details, relief flooded through Stephen. He needed time to prepare what he would say to Melanie when they were alone. He needed to find words adequate to the magnitude of his mistakes. But Melanie gathered her materials efficiently and stood, clearly intending to leave without any personal interaction. Stephen stood as well, moving faster than wisdom suggested given his weakened state. He intercepted her path to the elevator, his team and hers creating an awkward audience. "Melanie," he said, his voice emerging rougher than intended, "could we speak privately for just a moment?" She looked at him fully for the first time, and her eyes were stranger's eyes, polite but empty of recognition beyond the professional. "I'm not sure what we'd have to discuss beyond the partnership terms, Mr. Gibbs. If you have concerns about the proposal, please direct them to my office through appropriate channels." "Mr. Gibbs," Stephen repeated, the formal address striking like a slap. "Melanie, please."
5 minutes.
"That's all I'm asking. My schedule is fully committed this evening," she replied, already moving past him. "But I'm confident we can address any professional questions during our next scheduled meeting." Stephen reached out instinctively, his hand almost touching her arm before he caught himself. The nearness was enough to make Melanie pause and turn back, and for a brief instant something flickered across her carefully maintained expression. Not softness, but acknowledgement that he existed as more than a business contact. "I know what I did to you," Stephen said quietly, aware of their audience but desperate enough not to care. "I know the truth now. I know everything was a lie. Please, just give me a chance to explain what happened. Let me tell you how sorry I am." Melanie's face returned to that professional neutrality, but her words carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Gibbs, I'm afraid you're confusing me with someone from your past. I'm here representing the Lansing Medical Group's interests in a potential partnership with your organization. Our personal lives are entirely separate from these proceedings. I suggest you maintain that distinction." She walked away then, her team following, leaving Stephen standing in the conference room feeling like he'd been gutted. His assistant approached hesitantly, asking if he needed anything. Stephen shook his head, unable to speak, watching through glass walls as Melanie stepped into the elevator without looking back. Over the following weeks, the partnership negotiations continued. Melanie maintained her professional distance with such consistency that Stephen began to wonder if he'd imagined any history between them. She discussed data and contracts with the same neutral efficiency, whether he was in the room or not. Her team treated him cordially, unaware that their boss had any connection to him beyond business. Stephen learned about her life through observation and discreet questions directed at mutual professional contacts who saw no harm in discussing the impressive director of operations. He learned about her rise through hospital administration. He learned about her reputation for brilliant strategy paired with emotional coldness. He learned she lived alone with her daughters in a Victorian mansion and dated rarely, if at all. He learned she was considered one of the most successful healthcare administrators in the region despite her youth. What he couldn't learn was how to reach her. Every attempt at private conversation was deflected. Every personal comment was met with professional redirection. She had built a fortress around herself, and Stephen had no idea how to breach walls constructed specifically to keep out people like him. His illness progressed during this time, his body weakening despite aggressive treatments. The doctors urged him to expedite the bone marrow transplant discussions. His time was running out, yet Stephen couldn't bring himself to make the next move. Couldn't figure out how to tell Melanie that he needed her daughters to save him when he'd rejected those same daughters' existence 5 years earlier. During the final contract signing meeting, papers were spread across the conference table ready for signatures. The partnership was done, negotiated successfully, mutually beneficial. Champagne was poured, congratulations exchanged. Melanie signed her name with elegant efficiency and began gathering her materials to leave. Stephen's phone buzzed. His doctor's name appeared on the screen with a message marked urgent. He excused himself to the hallway and read the text that changed everything. The genetic testing results had been entered into the National Donor Database. 2 perfect matches existed for his bone marrow transplant: Riley and Kylie Payne. The system had automatically flagged them as potential donors and would be sending official contact letters to their guardian. Stephen's legs went weak. He leaned against the wall, phone trembling in his hand. Melanie would receive those letters within days. She would know he needed her daughters. She would finally understand why he'd been so desperate to speak with her. When he returned to the conference room, Melanie was gone. Chapter 4: The Truth That Destroys Twice. The letters arrived in identical white envelopes, official and clinical, requesting that the guardians of Riley Payne and Kylie Payne contact the National Marrow Donor Program regarding a potential match for an urgent transplant case. Melanie found them in her mailbox on a Tuesday evening, sandwiched between grocery store flyers and a magazine subscription. She stood in her driveway holding them, the autumn air sharp against her face, and felt reality tilt sideways. Riley and Kylie were upstairs finishing homework, their voices drifting through open windows as they argued good-naturedly about something insignificant. Normal childhood sounds, safe sounds. Melanie looked at the envelopes and understood immediately that normalcy was about to detonate. She didn't open them right away. Instead, she walked through her house, touching familiar surfaces, grounding herself in the life she'd built. The kitchen where she made the twins breakfast every morning, the living room where they watched movies on Friday nights, the office where she worked late after they were asleep. Everything solid, everything real, everything she'd constructed from absolute zero. Finally, in her bedroom with the door locked, she opened the first envelope. Medical jargon filled the page, but certain phrases jumped out with violence. Urgent need, perfect genetic match, life-saving procedure. The patient information was confidential, but Melanie didn't need a name to understand. She'd seen Stephen in that conference room. She'd noticed the weight loss and the coloring and the way he moved carefully, like someone whose body was betraying them. The second envelope contained identical information for Kylie. Both her daughters, both perfect matches, both being asked to potentially save the life of the man who'd called their mother a prostitute and denied their existence. Melanie sat on her bed, holding these letters, and felt laughter bubbling up from somewhere dark and broken inside her chest. The sound that emerged was ugly, devoid of humor, the kind of laughter that bordered on sobbing. The universe had a vicious sense of poetry. She spent that night researching bone marrow donation procedures for pediatric donors, reading medical journals and clinical studies until her eyes burned. The procedure was relatively safe, performed under general anesthesia, with recovery times usually measured in days rather than weeks. The risks were minimal but present: infection, reaction to anesthesia, pain, discomfort, nothing catastrophic. But her daughters would be sedated and subjected to needles piercing their bones to extract marrow that someone else needed to survive. Dawn arrived and found Melanie still awake, her mind calculating angles and consequences. She could refuse. The letters requested contact but couldn't compel it. She could throw them away and pretend they never arrived. Stephen would die, and her daughters would never know they could have saved him. That option held a certain dark satisfaction, revenge achieved through inaction. But Riley and Kylie would eventually learn the truth. Medical records existed. Genetic databases kept permanent records. Someday, somehow, her daughters would discover they'd been matches for someone who died, and they would ask their mother why she'd prevented them from helping. How would she explain that their potential recipient had also been the biological father who'd rejected them? How would she justify withholding their chance to save a life? Melanie had rebuilt herself on principles of strength and control, but this decision transcended personal vendetta. This was about the kind of people she wanted her daughters to become, the kind of values she wanted to instill. If she taught them that withholding mercy was acceptable when someone had wronged you, what exactly was she creating? She called the number on the letters that morning, speaking to a coordinator who explained the next steps with practiced efficiency. Yes, she would bring Riley and Kylie for preliminary testing. Yes, she understood the process. Yes, she would need to discuss this with the potential recipient. The coordinator gave her Stephen's name officially. "The patient is Stephen Gibbs," she said, unaware of the nuclear bomb she'd just detonated. "He's been informed you've been contacted. He's asked if he could speak with you before any testing proceeds. He says there's history between you that needs to be addressed." "Tell Mr. Gibbs," Melanie said, her voice ice and iron, "that I'll agree to testing for my daughters, but there are conditions he will accept before any procedure occurs." That evening, she sat Riley and Kylie down at the kitchen table with hot chocolate and gentle words. She told them a man was very sick, so sick he might die without help. She explained what bone marrow was and why sharing it could save lives. She made the medical procedure sound like an adventure rather than something scary. Both girls listened with wide eyes, Kylie thoughtful and Riley immediately enthusiastic. "We can really save someone?" Riley asked, her voice filled with that particular childhood belief in heroism. "You might be able to," Melanie confirmed, her heart cracking despite her careful control. "But I need you to understand this is a choice. No one can force you. If you're scared or uncomfortable, that's okay. The decision is yours." "I want to help," Riley declared immediately. Kylie studied her mother's face, reading things that shouldn't be visible there. "Who is the sick man, Mommy?" Melanie had prepared for this question, rehearsing the answer in her mind. "Someone I knew a long time ago, before you were born. We're not friends anymore, but his life matters, and you two might be the only people who can save him." "Is he a good person?" Kylie pressed. The question pierced something essential in Melanie's chest. She could lie. She could manipulate her daughter's decision by painting Stephen as villain or victim. Instead, she chose brutal honesty. He made terrible mistakes that hurt people, but he's still a human being who deserves a chance to live and possibly become better. Riley and Kylie agreed to testing without hesitation, motivated by uncomplicated childhood morality that saw saving lives as obviously correct. Melanie scheduled the appointments for that same week, moving with characteristic efficiency despite the emotional chaos. 3 days later, she stood outside Stephen's apartment building at dusk, having finally agreed to meet him before the testing began. Her lawyer had already drafted documents for Stephen to sign, legal paperwork that would permanently sever any parental rights, that would prevent him from ever claiming connection to Riley and Kylie, that would protect her daughters from him in every way that mattered. She pressed the buzzer, and Stephen's voice came through the intercom, thick with emotion. "Melanie, I'm here," she confirmed, her tone businesslike. "Are you going to let me in, or should we conduct this conversation via speaker?" The door unlocked with a buzz. Melanie climbed stairs to the 3rd floor, noting the building's ordinariness. This wasn't the luxury penthouse where Stephen had destroyed her. This was a standard apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. She filed the observation away, unsure what it meant. Stephen opened his door before she could knock, and seeing him up close shocked Melanie despite her preparation. He looked like he was dying, which of course he was, but confronting that reality felt different than reading about it in medical letters. His skin held that particular pallor that suggested illness had moved into his bones. His eyes were sunken, shadowed. He'd lost significant muscle mass, his body consuming itself. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Melanie walked into his apartment and noted the absence of luxury. Second-hand furniture, bare walls except for a few simple prints. Nothing ostentatious, nothing resembling the wealth he'd been born into. She turned to face him, her expression revealing nothing, and pulled the legal documents from her bag. "These are my terms," she said without preamble. "You'll sign away all parental rights permanently and irrevocably. You'll never attempt to contact Riley or Kylie directly. You'll never tell them you're their biological father. All medical procedures will occur at my hospital with my chosen medical team. You'll pay all expenses related to their care and recovery. After the transplant, you'll disappear from our lives completely and permanently. If you agree to these terms, I'll allow the testing to proceed. If you don't, we end this conversation now." Stephen took the documents with shaking hands and sat down on his couch, reading carefully despite obviously struggling to focus. When he finished, he looked up at Melanie with eyes that held too much emotion for her to comfortably witness. "I'll sign anything," he said. "I'll agree to everything. But before I do, I need you to know the truth about what happened. I need you to understand that I was lied to, that my mother fabricated every piece of evidence against you, that I've spent years hating myself for believing her." "I don't care," Melanie interrupted. "Your motivations and regrets are irrelevant to me. I'm here because my daughters are good people who deserve the chance to help save a life. That's the beginning and end of my interest in this situation." "Melanie, please," Stephen's voice broke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what I said to you was unforgivable. But those babies, Riley and Kylie, they're mine, aren't they? They're the daughters I rejected, the daughters I called into question, the daughters I've never met." Melanie's face remained granite. "Sign the papers, Stephen." He signed them all, his hand moving mechanically across pages, his signature looking weak and wavering. When he finished, Melanie collected the documents with clinical efficiency and turned to leave. "Wait," Stephen said desperately. "Can you at least tell me about them? Just something. Anything. What are they like?" Melanie stopped at the door, her back to him, debating whether cruelty or kindness served her daughters better. Finally, she spoke without turning around. "They're the most incredible human beings I've ever known. They're smart and brave and kind in ways that humble me. They laugh easily and love fiercely and see the world with wonder I can't access anymore. They're everything good that survived the worst night of my life. And they will never know what you are to them, because you're going to honor these documents and stay away." She left then, walking down the stairs and out into the evening, breathing deeply to control the emotions threatening her carefully maintained composure. She had done what needed to be done, protected her daughters, controlled the situation, maintained her strength, so why did she feel like she was standing on ground that might crumble at any moment? Chapter 5. The surgery that changes nothing. The hospital where Riley and Kylie would undergo their procedures had been transformed into something resembling a fortress at Melanie's insistence. She'd assigned her most trusted surgical team, personally reviewed every protocol, and ensured that not a single detail escaped her oversight. The pediatric wing had been essentially cordoned off, access restricted, security doubled. If control could ensure success, then this surgery would proceed with mechanical perfection. Stephen had been admitted to a separate floor, his pre-transplant conditioning already underway. Chemotherapy and radiation had further ravaged his already compromised system, preparing his body to accept the new bone marrow by destroying his existing diseased cells. Melanie had arranged the logistics so that their paths would never cross within the hospital, maintaining the separation she'd mandated. But Riley had different plans. On the morning before the scheduled procedures, Melanie arrived at the hospital. To find her daughter sitting in the cafeteria with a sketch pad, her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she drew. Keely sat beside her sister, watchful as always, clearly having tried to redirect Riley's determination and failed. "What are you doing here?" Melanie asked, her tone sharper than intended. "You're supposed to be in your room resting." Riley looked up, completely unrepentant. "I wanted to make a card for the sick man. It's scary being in the hospital. I thought it might make him feel better." The drawing showed flowers and sunshine and birds, rendered in the enthusiastic but imperfect style of childhood artwork. Words scrawled across the top read, "Get well soon," in Riley's careful printing. Melanie's chest tightened in ways that felt dangerous. "Baby, that's sweet, but we've discussed this," Melanie said, sitting down beside her daughters. "The man we're helping doesn't need to know who you are. This is anonymous donation." "But that's silly," Riley protested. "How can helping someone be anonymous? We're here. He's here. Why can't I just give him a card?" "Because sometimes adult situations are complicated in ways that are hard to explain." Melanie tried, grasping for language that would satisfy a 6-year-old without revealing truths she wasn't ready to share. Kylie studied her mother's face with that disconcerting perceptiveness that always made Melanie feel exposed. "You don't like the sick man," she observed. "That's why we can't meet him." Melanie wanted to deny it, but lying to her daughters had never been her practice. It's not about liking or disliking. It's about keeping things simple and protecting you both from situations you don't need to be involved in. "But we are involved," Kylie countered with logic beyond her years. "We're giving him part of ourselves. That seems pretty involved." Before Melanie could respond, a nurse appeared, looking apologetic. "Ms. Payne, I'm sorry, but there's a situation with the patient on the 8th floor. He's asking specifically for Riley and Kylie. He says he just wants to see them for a moment before tomorrow's procedures. He's quite upset." Melanie's jaw tightened. "Tell Mr. Gibbs the answer is no. We had an agreement." "Mom," Riley said quietly, "if he's really that upset, maybe we should just say hi. What if he's scared? I'd be scared if I was that sick." Adult logic in her daughter's voice created a sensation in Melanie's chest, like something fracturing. She looked at her daughters, Riley with her drawing and her open heart, Kylie with her protective vigilance and her questioning eyes, and realized they were better people than she was. They possessed grace she'd locked away years ago in favor of survival. Against every instinct, Melanie agreed to one brief visit. Stephen's hospital room felt smaller than it should have, compressed by the presence of too much emotion contained in insufficient space. He sat propped in his bed, connected to various monitors and IV lines, his appearance shocking despite Melanie's preparation. The treatments had stripped away any remaining pretense of health. He looked like a man at the edge of existence, held in place by medical intervention and desperate hope. When Riley and Kylie entered with their mother standing guard behind them, Stephen's face crumpled completely. Tears spilled down his cheeks unchecked. He tried to speak and couldn't, his throat working around words that refused to emerge. He simply stared at these two girls, their faces containing echoes of his own features mixed with Melanie's, their presence in his room feeling like hallucination except for their absolute solidity. Riley, moved by instinct toward suffering, approached his bedside without fear. "Don't cry," she said gently. "Crying makes being sick worse. That's what Mommy always tells us." "You're so beautiful," Stephen managed, his voice wrecked. "Both of you. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Kylie hung back, still watching, still evaluating. "Are you very scared?" she asked directly. Stephen nodded, unable to construct defensive lies in the presence of such straightforward questioning. terrified, he admitted. We're a little scared too, Kylie confessed, but Mom says the doctors are the best and we trust her. She wouldn't let anything bad happen to us. The acknowledgement of Melanie's role, spoken with such complete faith, created a moment of unbearable awareness. Stephen looked at Melanie standing in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, and understood exactly what she'd built while he'd been drowning in guilt. She'd become everything, protector and provider, and the single pillar holding up these children's entire world. Riley pulled out her drawing and placed it on Stephen's bedside table. I made this for you, to help you feel braver. Stephen picked up the card with trembling hands, studying the flowers and birds and sunshine like they were sacred texts. This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me, he said, meaning it absolutely. I'm going to keep this forever. Forever is a long time, Riley said seriously. But if you get better, maybe you can see us again sometime? Mummy says we can't, but maybe she'll change her mind if you get well. Melanie intervened then, her voice gentle but firm. Girls, we need to let Mr. Gibbs rest now. We all have a big day tomorrow. Stephen reached into the drawer of his bedside table and pulled out 2 small wrapped boxes. I was hoping I'd get to meet you, he said, handing one to each girl. These are for after your procedures. To thank you for being brave enough to help me. Inside each box was a silver bracelet, simple and beautiful, engraved with their names. Riley put hers on immediately, admiring how it caught the light. Kylie held hers more carefully, still evaluating, still protecting something she couldn't name. Thank you, both girls said, their manners automatic from Melanie's teaching. As they left the room, Riley turned back one more time. I hope we make you better, she said with all the fierce certainty of childhood. I hope you get to do everything you want to do and be really, really happy. Stephen waved goodbye, still crying, still clutching the card Riley had made, and Melanie ushered her daughters out before the moment could expand into something even more complicated. The surgery day arrived with clinical efficiency. Both procedures were scheduled simultaneously in adjacent operating rooms. Melanie split herself between them, her scrubs and surgical mask hiding everything except her eyes as she watched the team's work. Riley's extraction went smoothly, the needles penetrating her hip bones and withdrawing marrow with practiced precision. Kylie's followed identically, both girls unconscious and peaceful, unaware of the gift they were giving. Stephen's transplant began hours later after the marrow had been processed and prepared. Melanie watched through observation windows as the medical team infused her daughter's bone marrow into his bloodstream, watched the bags empty and the cells enter his body and begin their work. The procedure itself was anticlimactic, just transfusion, nothing more, but the implications were enormous. Recovery proceeded according to expectations. Riley and Kylie woke up sore but resilient, their bodies bouncing back with characteristic childhood vigor. Within days, they were walking the hallways, annoying the nurses with questions and demanding to return home. Stephen's recovery was slower, more tentative, his body still fighting the battle between rejection and acceptance as the new marrow attempted to establish itself in his bones. Melanie visited Stephen's room once during his isolation period, maintaining the clinical distance of a hospital administrator checking on procedures within her facility. He lay behind plastic barriers, protected from infection, his body stripped of immune function and waiting to see if the transplant would take. The girls are fine, she told him through the barrier. They're recovering perfectly. They'll be discharged tomorrow. Thank you, Stephen said, his voice weak but sincere, for everything, for letting them help me, for bringing them to see me, for giving them life at all. Melanie said nothing, just turned to leave. I dream about them, Stephen continued, stopping her. Every night since I met them, I dream about all the moments I missed. First words, first steps, first everything. I dream about being there for them, and then I wake up and remember I have no right to any of it. You don't, Melanie confirmed, her voice without inflection. Those moments belong to them and me. You're just the person whose life they saved. She left him in isolation, surrounded by machines and plastic barriers and regret that served no constructive purpose. His survival was no longer her concern beyond professional obligation. The documents were signed. The boundaries were established. After discharge, he would disappear from their lives permanently, except Riley kept asking about him. She wanted to know if the sick man was getting better. She wanted to send more drawings. She wanted updates that Melanie had to carefully deflect. Riley said less but noticed more, her eyes tracking her mother's reactions whenever the subject arose. 2 weeks after the transplant, Melanie received notification that Stephen's body was accepting the new bone marrow. The engraftment was successful. His prognosis had shifted from terminal to hopeful. He would live, carried forward by cells her daughters had given him. Biological life saved by biology he'd rejected when it was convenient. The irony tasted bitter in ways Melanie couldn't fully process. Chapter 6. The Poison That Never Stops Spreading. Constance. Gibbs arrived at the Lansing Medical Group headquarters on a Tuesday afternoon, announced and expected. Her presence creating immediate ripples through the administrative staff. She moved through the building like visiting royalty, her designer clothes and diamond jewelry announcing wealth before words became necessary. By the time she reached Melanie's office, every employee had been alerted that someone significant had arrived. Melanie kept her waiting exactly 15 minutes, a power move that Constance surely recognized but couldn't overtly challenge. When her secretary finally ushered the older woman into the spacious corner office, Melanie didn't rise from behind her desk, didn't offer coffee or pleasantries, simply gestured toward a chair with the bored efficiency of someone whose time was valuable. "Mrs. Gibbs," Melanie said, her tone professionally distant. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment." Constance sat with practiced grace, arranging herself with the kind of studied casualness that suggested nothing was actually casual at all. She studied Melanie's office, the prestigious medical degrees framed on walls, the awards acknowledging administrative excellence, the view overlooking the city's medical district, and her expression revealed grudging respect beneath layers of resentment. "You've done well for yourself," Constance observed, the compliment edged with something sharp. "Quite the transformation from the desperate girl my son threw out 5 years ago." Melanie's face showed nothing, her executive training serving her well. "If you came here to reminisce about your past cruelties, you've wasted your time. I have meetings scheduled shortly." "I came to congratulate you," Constance said, her smile perfectly polished and completely devoid of warmth. "You managed to position yourself exactly where you needed to be, close enough to my son during his illness to offer salvation through those girls. Quite strategic. I underestimated your long-term planning abilities." The accusation hung between them, absurd and insulting and so perfectly Constance that Melanie almost laughed. "You think I engineered your son's cancer? That I somehow anticipated needing leverage 5 years in advance? Your paranoia has reached clinical levels, Mrs. Gibbs. I think you're an opportunist who saw a chance to extract revenge or resources or both," Constance countered, her voice remaining pleasant despite the venom beneath. "Stephen is weak, always has been, emotional, susceptible to manipulation. He's convinced himself he wronged you when he simply made a prudent decision to eliminate an unsuitable partner." Melanie leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Constance with predatory focus. "Let me clarify something for you since you seem confused. I don't want your son. I don't want your family's money. I don't want anything from either of you, except permanent absence from my daughters' lives. Stephen needed their bone marrow, and I allowed them to help him because they're better people than I am. That's the beginning and end of the story. Then why all the restrictions?" Miss Constance pressed. "Why the legal documents preventing him from acknowledging his own children? Sounds like control to me. Sounds like someone positioning for future demands." Melanie stood, moving around her desk with deliberate slowness, her height and presence dominating the space. She planted her hands on her desk's edge and leaned toward Constance with an expression that could have frozen sunlight. Those restrictions exist because your son looked at me while I carried his daughters and called me a prostitute, because he told me I'd trapped him, because he threw me out while I was pregnant and didn't care whether his children lived or died. I won't let Riley and Kylie anywhere near a man capable of that level of cruelty. And I certainly won't let them near the woman who orchestrated the entire destruction. Constance's composure finally cracked slightly, a muscle jumping in her jaw. I protected my family. You destroyed one, Melanie corrected. Mine? For something my mother did decades ago. You're not protective, Mrs. Gibbs. You're vindictive and pathetic, and so desperate to maintain control that you'll sacrifice anyone to preserve your illusions. The older woman stood as well, drawing herself up with offended dignity. You think you've won something. You think you've risen above your station and proven yourself. But you're still the housekeeper's daughter who tried to infiltrate her betters. Stephen may have momentary guilt, but eventually he'll remember who he is and where he comes from. He'll rebuild his life with appropriate people, and you'll return to obscurity. Melanie moved to her office door and opened it, the gesture unmistakable. This conversation is finished. Leave my building, Mrs. Gibbs, if you contact me again. If you come near my daughters, if you make any attempt to interfere in our lives, I will destroy what remains of your reputation with documented evidence of everything you did 5 years ago. Constance's eyes widened slightly. You're threatening me? I'm explaining consequences, Melanie clarified. I have the actress you hired to pose as me in those hotel photographs. I have the clerk who filed false police reports. I have bank records showing payments from your accounts. I have testimony and documentation and evidence enough to prove fraud and defamation. They've held on to all of it, just waiting to see if you'd be foolish enough to reappear in my life. The color drained from Constance's face. Stephen doesn't need to know any of this. He's recovering. The stress could... Stephen already knows, Melanie interrupted. He hired investigators after discovering Riley and Kylie existed. He knows everything you did. He knows exactly what you are, and that knowledge is eating him alive in ways I find deeply satisfying. Constance walked to the door, her earlier confidence evaporated. But at the threshold, she turned back with one final attempt at control. Those girls are Gibbs blood, whether you like it or not. Eventually that will matter. Those girls are Paynes, Melanie said with absolute conviction. They carry my name, my values, and my strength. Your family's poison doesn't touch them because I won't let it. After Constance left, Melanie returned to her desk and sat heavily, her hands trembling slightly despite her maintained composure. The confrontation had required more energy than she'd anticipated, stirring up emotions she'd worked hard to bury. She pressed her palms against her eyes, breathing deeply, reconstructing the walls that felt suddenly fragile. Her phone rang. Stephen's name appeared on the screen. Melanie considered ignoring it, but curiosity overcame her better judgment. "What do you want?" she answered. "My mother just called," Stephen said, his voice carrying a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "She told me about her visit to your office. I'm calling to apologize for her and to promise she won't bother you again. Your promises mean nothing, Stephen. Your mother's behavior is yours to manage. Keep her away from me and my daughters, or I'll follow through on what I told her." "I believe you," Stephen said quietly. "And I want you to know, I've severed contact with her, completely. I'm done enabling her toxicity. I'm done pretending her actions were somehow protective rather than destructive." Melanie processed this information, uncertain how to weight it. "That's your decision to make about your family. It doesn't change anything between us." "I know," Stephen agreed. "But I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who would have believed you 5 years ago. Someone who would have stood up to his mother instead of letting her poison everything I touched." "Oh, good for you," Melanie said flatly. "Now leave me alone." She hung up before he could respond, but his words lingered uncomfortably. She didn't want to acknowledge his transformation. She didn't want to believe people could change that fundamentally. Accepting that possibility meant confronting the reality that she'd frozen herself in trauma while the world around her kept moving. That evening, she found Riley trying on her silver bracelet again, admiring how it caught lamplight. "Mom, do you think the sick man is all better now?" "He's recovering," Melanie confirmed carefully. "The doctors say he's doing well." "Good," Riley said with satisfaction. "I'm glad we could help him. It feels nice to help people." Melanie pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her small body. "You're an incredible person, Riley. You and your sister both. I'm so proud of who you are. Can we meet him again sometime?" Riley asked. "Just to see if he's okay?" The question landed like a stone in water, creating ripples Melanie couldn't control. "We'll see," she deflected. The classic parental non-answer that satisfied nothing. But as Riley drifted off to sleep that night, bracelet still on her wrist, Melanie stood in the doorway watching and wondered whether the walls she'd built were protecting her daughters or imprisoning them. Whether strength meant never bending or knowing when rigidity would cause more damage than flexibility. She had no answers, only the same tight control she'd maintained for years and a growing sense that something fundamental was shifting beneath her carefully constructed foundation. Chapter 7. The Counted Man Who Lives Outside Her Gates. Stephen's recovery progressed with medical efficiency but emotional complexity that defied clinical charts. His body accepted the bone marrow transplant with surprising enthusiasm, his blood counts rising steadily, his energy returning incrementally. Within months, he was discharged from intensive medical supervision, cleared to resume normal activities with continued monitoring. Physically, he was healing. Mentally, he remained fractured in ways that couldn't be measured by blood tests. He sold his remaining stake in what had been Gibbs Manufacturing, the final severance from his family's legacy. The money felt like an ending rather than a beginning. Wealth, accumulated through generations of work, he could no longer pretend mattered. He donated significant portions to medical research and organizations supporting single mothers, attempting to convert inherited privilege into something useful. Then he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He enrolled in a social work program at the local university, starting as a mature student among people half his age. His classmates couldn't understand why someone with his background would choose such challenging and undercompensated work. Stephen didn't explain that he was trying to learn how to see suffering without looking away, how to help without condescension, how to become someone who might deserve a second chance he knew he'd never receive. But his healthiest habit warred with his most destructive one. While Stephen built a new life during daylight hours, he spent evenings existing in Melanie's orbit like a ghost, unable to leave the place it died. He told himself he just wanted to see the daughters who'd saved him, just wanted to ensure they were thriving, just needed proximity to the miracle that had given him life. The truth was more complicated and more pathological. He knew Riley and Kylie's school schedule. He knew they attended Willowbrook Academy, that they wore navy uniforms with the school crest, that they were in first grade now. He found himself parking near the school during afternoon dismissal, watching from inside his car as they emerged, laughing and talking. Riley was always more animated, her hands gesturing as she told stories. Kylie walked slightly behind, watchful, occasionally interjecting calmer observations. Stephen never approached them, never violated the legal boundaries Melanie had established. But he watched, and the watching became an addiction he couldn't break. He saw them at the park on Saturday mornings, recognized the pattern after observing 3 consecutive weekends. They came with Birdie Walsh, the elderly woman who clearly served as their grandmother figure, and they played on equipment with the fearless energy of childhood. He sat on benches far away, pretending to read books he never actually processed. his attention entirely consumed by these two girls who carried his genetic code and nothing else of him. Melanie noticed immediately. Her security system tracked his vehicle, appearing repeatedly near her property. Her contacts at the school mentioned a man sitting in a car during dismissal. Theodore Lansing asked carefully if there was a problem with Stephen Gibbs, because he'd been observed at several locations where Melanie frequented. She could have obtained a restraining order easily. Should have, probably. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the satisfaction of watching him suffer. Perhaps it was understanding that his punishment was self-inflicted and therefore more meaningful than anything she could legally impose. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion from maintaining rage for so long. Whatever the reason, Melanie allowed Stephen to exist in their periphery, present but never touching, seeing but never connecting. Her decision to tolerate his presence didn't mean she trusted it. She increased security around the girls, ensured they were never unsupervised in public spaces, and maintained constant awareness of their surroundings. But she didn't confront Stephen, didn't force his removal, didn't take the legal actions available to her. Riley noticed him first, of course. She had her father's observational skills, even if she knew nothing about their connection. "There's a man at the park who's always there when we are," she mentioned casually one afternoon. "He just sits and reads. He seems sad." Melanie's blood went cold despite expecting this eventually. "Has he ever talked to you?" "No, never," Riley confirmed. "He's just there. Kylie thinks he's lonely." "He probably is lonely," Kylie added quietly. "He looks like someone who lost something important." Melanie processed her daughter's observations, disturbed by their perceptiveness. "If that man ever approaches you, ever tries to talk to you, you come find me immediately. Understand?" Both girls nodded solemnly, sensing the seriousness beneath their mother's calm tone. They knew their mother's protective instincts bordered on fierce, that crossing certain boundaries would trigger responses they'd never witnessed, but could somehow feel waiting. Stephen's transformation continued in other ways. He started volunteering at a crisis center for men dealing with substance abuse and domestic violence, using his own story as cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked privilege and unexamined assumptions. He spoke at schools about the importance of questioning authority, even parental authority, about thinking independently rather than accepting prejudice. He wrote articles for local publications about accountability and change, his byline becoming associated with difficult conversations about class and power. People who'd known the old Stephen barely recognized this version. He'd shaved his head after his hair fell out from chemotherapy and never let it grow back, a permanent reminder of his brush with mortality. He dressed differently, spoke differently, carried himself with humility that looked alien on someone raised to expect deference. His mother refused to speak to him. His former social circle had largely abandoned him, and his isolation was complete except for the students and colleagues and suffering people who comprised his new world. One evening, Theodore Lansing invited Melanie to dinner at his home, a standing arrangement they maintained monthly since his wife's passing. He'd become something between mentor and father figure, his wisdom earned through decades of hospital administration and personal loss. Over wine and pasta he'd prepared himself. He broached the subject Melanie had been avoiding. "I've noticed Stephen Gibbs has been making himself visible around you and the girls," Theodore said carefully. "Should I be concerned?" Melanie swirled wine in her glass, watching it catch lamplight. "He's not threatening, just present, watching from a distance. That doesn't sound healthy for anyone involved." "It's probably not," Melanie agreed. "But I think he needs to see them, needs to understand what he lost. I'm not sure why I'm allowing it, but I am." Theodore studied her with the kind of perception that came from genuine care. "You know he's completely changed his life. Sold his family's legacy, enrolled in school, dedicated himself to service work. The transformation is remarkable." "People don't change that fundamentally," Melanie said, the words automatic after years of believing them. I did, Theodore countered gently. After I hurt my wife, after she almost left me, I rebuilt myself completely. It took years. It was painful and humbling and necessary. I became someone who could be trusted again, and our marriage afterward was stronger than it had been before the betrayal. Melanie set down her wine glass, uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. Are you suggesting I should forgive Stephen? I'm suggesting that holding on to rage for years has a cost, Theodore replied. I see it in how you interact with your daughters. You provide everything material, but emotionally you're walled off. They feel it, Melanie. They're starting to notice that other mothers hug longer, laugh easier, cry openly. You're so busy being strong that you've forgotten how to be soft. And softness is not weakness. The observation struck too close to Birdie's earlier comments, creating a cumulative weight Melanie couldn't easily dismiss. What if softness gets them hurt? What if letting my guard down means someone gets close enough to destroy us again? What if maintaining walls means they grow up thinking love and distance are the same thing? Theodore countered. Or what if your strength, admirable as it is, teaches them that vulnerability is shameful rather than human? Melanie had no response. She finished her wine in silence, while Theodore gracefully changed subjects, but his words followed her home and settled into the spaces she usually filled with work and determination. That night, she found Riley crying quietly in her room, unusual for her typically cheerful daughter. When Melanie asked what was wrong, Riley looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. Do you love us, Mom? The question detonated something in Melanie's chest. Of course I love you, more than anything in the world. Why would you even ask? Because you never say it, Riley explained, wiping tears with her pajama sleeve. And you don't hug us the way other moms hug. You pat our backs instead. And you never cry or laugh really hard or seem happy. You just seem busy. Melanie sat on Riley's bed, feeling like she'd been struck. She pulled both her daughters close. Kylie had appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices, and held them with an intensity she'd been rationing for years. I love you both so much that sometimes I can barely breathe from how much I love you. You are my entire world. Everything I've built, everything I've become, it's all for you. Then why don't you show us more? Kylie asked, her voice small. Why does it feel like we have to be perfect for you to be happy? The words cracked something essential in Melanie's carefully maintained facade. Her daughters were right. She'd been so focused on providing safety and security that she'd forgotten to provide warmth. She'd given them everything except the thing they needed most, a mother who could show emotion without fear that feeling too much would break her again. She spent that night lying awake. Riley and Kylie curled against her in a pile of closeness they'd needed for years and confronted realities she'd been avoiding. Her daughters were growing up watching her model a life of control and distance. They were learning to associate strength with emotional absence. And somewhere out in the darkness, the man who'd destroyed her was becoming someone who might actually deserve a second glance. None of it made sense. All of it made her uncomfortable. But ignoring it was no longer an option. Chapter 8. The Cracks in Her Fortress. The music boxes arrived on Riley and Kylie's 7th birthday. 2 identically wrapped packages left on Melanie's porch without explanation. The wrapping paper was simple craft brown with white string, the kind of minimalist aesthetic that suggested thought rather than convenience. No card, no return address, just 2 boxes emanating faint mechanical sounds when shaken. Melanie stood in her foyer holding them, knowing immediately who'd sent them, despite the anonymity. She could dispose of them before the girls woke up, maintain the boundaries she'd established, prevent this intrusion into their carefully managed existence. But Riley appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair sleep-mussed, her face lighting up at the sight of wrapped presents. Are those for us? She called, already descending with the energy of a child on her birthday. Kylie followed more slowly, her watchful nature making her pause to read her mother's expression before fully committing to excitement. She'd inherited that particular skill from Melanie herself, the ability to sense emotional undercurrents others missed. "They were left on the porch," Melanie said carefully. "I'm not sure who sent them, but Riley had already claimed one box, tearing into wrapping paper with enthusiastic abandon. Inside was a wooden music box, handcrafted from what looked like cherry wood, its surface smooth and perfectly finished. A small ballerina stood on top, delicate and precise. When Riley wound the key on the bottom, music began. A melody Melanie recognized immediately because it bypassed her rational mind and struck directly at memory. It was the song she used to hum while pregnant, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her, a tune she'd often found herself unconsciously repeating during those months when Stephen had still loved her, or when she'd believed he loved her. Before everything shattered, Kylie opened her box to find an identical music box, the twin to Riley's, the ballerina spinning in synchronized time to the same haunting melody. Both girls were enchanted, winding their boxes repeatedly, watching the figurines pirouette, unaware their mother had gone rigid with memory. "These are beautiful," Riley breathed. "Who do you think sent them?" Probably Birdie," Melanie lied, her voice not quite steady. "She loves surprising you both." But Birdie appeared in the kitchen doorway with her own wrapped gifts, looking confused. "Those aren't from me, dear, though they're lovely. Whoever made them put real craftsmanship into the work." The girls didn't pursue the mystery, too absorbed in their new treasures to worry about provenance. But Melanie spent the day distracted, the melody from those music boxes threading through her thoughts like an unwelcome ghost. Stephen had remembered. After all these years, he'd remembered what she hummed, what brought her comfort, what she'd shared with the daughters he'd rejected. That evening, after cake and presents and the exhausted satisfaction of celebrated childhood, Birdie found Melanie alone in the kitchen washing dishes with unnecessary force. "You know who sent them," Birdie observed, not quite a question. "I suspect," Melanie admitted. "And it's bothering you. It's invasive. It's crossing boundaries. It's thoughtful," Birdie interrupted gently. "It's remembering something personal and using it to bring joy to children he's not allowed to know. You can be angry about many things Stephen Gibbs has done, Melanie, but being angry about kindness makes you look like you're searching for reasons to maintain walls." Melanie turned to face the older woman, her frustration evident. "What am I supposed to do? Forgive him? Pretend the past didn't happen? Let him waltz back into our lives like the last 7 years were some unfortunate misunderstanding?" "I'm not suggesting any of that," Birdie replied calmly. "I'm suggesting you might be exhausting yourself by holding a defensive position against someone who stopped attacking. He's not trying to take your daughters. He's not demanding rights or recognition. He's existing quietly at a distance and occasionally sending anonymous gifts. That's not warfare. That's penance." "I don't want his penance," Melanie said, but the words felt hollow. "Then what do you want?" Birdie pressed. "And I mean really want, not what you think you should want or what feels safest. What would actually let you breathe easier?" Melanie had no answer. She'd spent so many years knowing exactly what she wanted. Security, success, protection for her daughters, impenetrable walls around her heart. But somewhere along the way, those goals had shifted from aspirations to prisons, structures she'd built that now confined her as much as they defended her. The following weeks brought subtle shifts in Melanie's carefully controlled existence. She noticed herself hugging Riley and Kylie longer, lingering in their embrace rather than pulling away after perfunctory contact. She started laughing at their jokes instead of just smiling politely. She cried during a movie they watched together, actually cried instead of maintaining composure, and the girls looked shocked and then deeply satisfied, as if witnessing their mother's tears confirmed something essential they'd been questioning. Work continued demanding her attention, but Melanie found herself delegating more, leaving the office earlier, prioritizing presence over productivity in ways that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Theodore noticed and approved, commenting that she seemed lighter somehow, less like she was carrying the entire hospital system on her shoulders alone. But the shifts in her personal life collided with continued reminders of Stephen's presence. She saw him at a hospital fundraiser she couldn't avoid, watching from across the room as he spoke earnestly with a group of trauma counselors. He looked healthier now, having regained weight and color, his appearance no longer broadcasting illness. But he also looked different in ways that transcended physical recovery. He carried himself without the unconscious arrogance that used to define him, his body language suggesting someone who'd learned to occupy space without demanding it. Their eyes met once across the crowded room, and Stephen raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement before turning away, not pursuing contact, not forcing conversation, just existing in the same space without making it about her. Melanie watched him leave early, presumably to avoid making her uncomfortable, and felt something complicated twist in her chest. On the drive home, she had to pull over because her hands were shaking. She sat in her car at a gas station, gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what she was feeling. It wasn't attraction. She refused to let it be attraction. But it wasn't quite hatred anymore either. The rage that had sustained her for 7 years had burned itself out, leaving behind something more complex and difficult to navigate. She realized, with a kind of horrified clarity, that she no longer knew who Stephen was. The man who'd destroyed her was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. And not knowing him meant she couldn't predict him, couldn't control him, couldn't categorize him neatly into the villain role that had been so comforting. Riley's school project arrived like a grenade, lobbed into Melanie's carefully managed equilibrium. The assignment was simple: create a family tree including everyone important in your life. The teacher emphasized that family wasn't just blood relations, but anyone who played significant roles: friends, mentors, neighbors who felt like relatives. Riley approached the project with characteristic enthusiasm, immediately including Birdie Walsh near the top of her tree, labeling her Grandma Birdie with careful lettering. She included her teachers, her best friends, her pediatrician who'd cared for her since NICU, and then she asked the question Melanie had been dreading since the music boxes arrived. "Mom, can we include the man from the hospital? The one whose life we saved?" Melanie looked up from the work she'd brought home, her mind scrambling for responses that would satisfy without explaining. "Why would you want to include him, baby?" "Because he's connected to us," Riley explained, with the irrefutable logic of childhood. "We gave him part of ourselves, literally. That seems like family to me, even if we don't really know him." "He's not family," Melanie said carefully. "He was someone we helped. That's different." "But you always tell us that helping people creates connections," Kylie interjected, appearing with her own family tree draft. "You say that kindness builds relationships even with strangers. So why doesn't it count with him?" Melanie felt cornered by her own teachings, by the values she'd instilled in her daughters, now being used to question the boundaries she'd established. "This situation is more complicated than you both understand. Sometimes adult relationships have histories that make simple connections impossible." "Did he hurt you?" Riley asked suddenly, her face serious. "Is that why you don't want us to know him?" The direct question stole Melanie's breath. She'd known this moment would arrive eventually, but preparation didn't make it easier. She couldn't lie to her daughters, had never made lying part of their relationship. But she also wasn't ready to explain everything that had happened 7 years ago. "He made mistakes that hurt me very much," Melanie admitted slowly. "Before you were born. That's why we keep distance between our families." "But people can change," Kylie said softly. "You always tell us that people can learn and grow and become better. Did he not become better?" The question, delivered with such innocent hope, cracked something fundamental in Melanie's defenses. Her daughters were better people than she was. They possessed grace and forgiveness that she'd locked away years ago in favor of survival. They saw the world with possibility she'd forgotten existed. "I don't know if he's better," Melanie confessed. I don't know who he is now. I only know who he was, and that person wasn't someone I could trust. Riley and Kylie exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that siblings develop when navigating complicated parents. They returned to their projects without pushing further, but Melanie noticed that Riley left a blank branch on her family tree, labeled simply "the sad man from the hospital," and Melanie didn't have the heart to make her erase it. That night, after the girls were asleep, Melanie stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the Victorian mansion's grounds, at the security lights illuminating her carefully cultivated gardens. At the walls she'd built both literal and metaphorical. She thought about Theodore's words regarding the cost of prolonged rage. She thought about Birdie's observation that strength and ice weren't synonymous. She thought about her daughters, asking why she never seemed happy, and she admitted, just to herself in the darkness of her bedroom, that maybe maintaining fortress walls had stopped being protection and started being punishment. Maybe the person she was punishing most wasn't Stephen at all. The admission felt like betrayal, like weakness, like surrender to something dangerous. But it also felt uncomfortably like the beginning of truth. Chapter 9. The walls begin to tremble. Theodore, Lensing's dinner invitation, arrived during a week when Melanie felt her foundations shifting in ways she couldn't quite articulate. She'd been distracted at work, missing details that normally received her immediate attention. Her mind occupied with questions she couldn't answer about family trees and music boxes, and the difference between strength and rigidity. Theodore's timing was impeccable as usual, his invitation feeling less like social engagement and more like intervention. His home was familiar territory by now, a sprawling house in an older neighborhood where trees were mature and houses were substantial. His late wife's presence remained in the decor, her taste evident in the artwork and furniture, her memory honored rather than erased. Theodore had loved her fiercely, had almost lost her, had rebuilt himself into someone worthy of her forgiveness. Melanie knew the story because he'd shared it during previous dinners. His openness about failure and recovery, unusual in men of his generation. Over salmon and asparagus, Theodore approached the subject Melanie had been avoiding with everyone else. "I've been watching you struggle with something for months now. Want to talk about it, or shall we continue pretending you're perfectly fine?" Melanie smiled despite herself. Theodore's directness was refreshing in its lack of pretense. "I'm not sure how to articulate what I'm struggling with." "Try," he encouraged. "I've got nowhere to be, and I'm an excellent listener." So Melanie told him about Riley's family tree project, about the music boxes and their haunting melody, about seeing Stephen transformed into someone unrecognizable from the man who'd destroyed her, about her daughters asking why she never seemed happy, about feeling like the walls she'd built for protection had become her prison. Theodore listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful and non-judgmental. When she finished, he poured them both more wine and settled back in his chair. "You know, I destroyed my marriage," he said, not quite a question. "I've mentioned it before, but I don't think I've told you the full story." Melanie waited, sensing this was important. "I had an affair," Theodore continued bluntly. "Long-term, not just a momentary mistake. I betrayed my wife systematically for nearly 2 years. When she discovered it, she could have destroyed me. Certainly she could have left me, and everyone would have supported her decision. Instead, she gave me a choice. Either commit completely to rebuilding our marriage through genuine change, or admit I was unwilling to do the work and let her move on." "What did you do?" Melanie asked. "I chose the hard path. Individual therapy, couples counseling, complete transparency about my life and whereabouts. Years of proving through actions that I'd fundamentally changed. It was excruciating and humbling and the most important work I've ever done." Theodore's eyes grew distant with memory. "The marriage we built after betrayal was stronger than what existed before, because it was based on truth instead of assumptions. My wife became my best friend in ways she hadn't been when we were younger, and taking each other for granted." "But Stephen didn't just betray me," Melanie protested. He eviscerated me. He threw me away while pregnant. He called me unspeakable things. That's not the same as infidelity. You're right, Theodore agreed. It's not the same. What he did was arguably worse. But here's the question that matters. Is he doing the work? Is he demonstrating through sustained action over years that he's become someone different? Not just apologizing, not just feeling guilty, but actually transforming. Melanie considered the question seriously. Stephen had sold his family legacy, enrolled in social work school, dedicated himself to service, maintained respectful distance despite clearly desperate to be closer, written articles about accountability and change, transformed his appearance and lifestyle and entire social circle. Yes, she admitted slowly, he seems to be genuinely different. Then the question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness, Theodore continued. The question is whether you deserve to move past the trauma of what happened. Whether carrying that rage for the rest of your life serves you or destroys you. Whether your daughters benefit from watching their mother live in permanent defensive crouch. Forgiveness feels like betraying myself, Melanie confessed. Like saying what he did was acceptable. Forgiveness isn't about condoning past actions, Theodore corrected gently. It's about releasing yourself from the obligation to keep punishing someone. It's choosing your own peace over their continued suffering. It's decidedly selfish, actually, which is why it's so powerful. The words settled into Melanie's consciousness like seeds, requiring time to germinate. She drove home processing the conversation, pulling into her driveway to find Riley and Kylie still awake, despite the late hour, peering out their bedroom window. "Mom!" Riley called as Melanie entered the house. "There's someone at the gate." Melanie's protective instincts flared immediately. She checked her security system and saw a figure standing just outside her property's entrance, illuminated by motion-activated lights. Stephen. Of course it was Stephen. "Stay inside," she instructed the girls, pulling on a jacket and walking down her long driveway to confront him. He stood in pouring rain, completely soaked, his hands shoved in his pockets. His expression carrying such raw desperation that it stopped Melanie several feet away. They stared at each other across the boundary marked by her gate, rain streaming between them, years of history and hurt creating distance more substantial than any physical barrier. "I'm leaving," Stephen said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm moving away, Montana. There's a program there for the foundation I'm involved with, and I'll be running their rural outreach. I came to tell you that I'm done watching from parking lots, done existing in your periphery like some pathetic ghost, done hoping for something I know I'll never have." Melanie crossed her arms against the cold, uncertain why this announcement made her chest tighten painfully. "I need you to know something before I go," Stephen continued, words tumbling out like he'd been rehearsing them for weeks. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. But I need you to understand that I've spent 7 years learning to live with what I destroyed. 7 years becoming someone who would never do that again. Not to manipulate you or earn anything from you, but because being that person was killing me." "Why are you telling me this?" Melanie asked. "Because you deserve to know that Riley and Kylie saved more than my life," Stephen replied. "They saved the possibility that I could become someone worth saving. They're the most incredible human beings I've ever been connected to, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful I got to meet them once, even briefly." Rain plastered his hair to his skull, streamed down his face, mixing with what might have been tears. He looked wrecked and sincere, and nothing like the arrogant man who'd destroyed her 7 years ago. "I see you sometimes," Stephen continued. "From a distance. I watch you with them, and I see everything I lost, everything I threw away, and I understand that this is my punishment. Knowing they exist, knowing they're magnificent, knowing I'll never be part of their lives because I didn't believe in them when it mattered." "You're right," Melanie said, her voice harder than she intended. "You won't be part of their lives. You signed documents. You made agreements. That doesn't change just because you've spent years feeling sorry for yourself. I know, Stephen agreed immediately. I'm not here asking for anything. I'm here saying goodbye. And I'm here apologizing one final time for ruining the best thing that ever happened to me. You were remarkable then, and you're extraordinary now. And I was too stupid and weak to recognize it when I had the chance. He turned to leave, and Melanie surprised herself by calling out, "Wait." Stephen stopped, turned back, hope and dread warring across his features. Melanie stood in the rain, her mind racing through calculations and consequences, feeling the fortress she'd built beginning to crack in ways that terrified her. She thought about her daughters asking why she never seemed happy. She thought about Theodore's words about choosing peace over punishment. She thought about Birdie saying that softness wasn't weakness. "Don't move to Montana," she heard herself say, the words emerging before conscious decision. "Or do move to Montana. I don't care. But if you want to know Riley and Kylie, if you genuinely want to be part of their lives, then you'll earn it slowly over years, with no promises and no guarantees." Stephen stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can meet them, supervised, once a month, at my house with me present. You'll tell them age-appropriate truths about your mistakes and your efforts to change. You'll build trust slowly. You'll respect every boundary I establish. And if at any point you demonstrate that you're still the man who destroyed us, you're gone permanently. Melanie—" Stephen's voice broke completely. "This isn't love," Melanie interrupted firmly. "This isn't reconciliation. This isn't forgiveness. This is me choosing to give my daughters the possibility of knowing their biological father because they're better people than I am, and they deserve that choice. Nothing more." "I understand," Stephen said, nodding repeatedly. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give. Thank you. Thank you." He started to approach the gate, but Melanie held up her hand, stopping him. "Ground rules. You never tell them you love them until you've proven through years of consistent behavior that you understand what love actually means. You never make promises you can't absolutely keep. You never speak badly about me to them. And you never, ever use them to get closer to me. Understood?" "Understood," Stephen agreed instantly. "Good, now go home. Dry off. We'll schedule the first meeting for 2 weeks from now. I'll email you the details." Stephen nodded and walked away into the rain. And Melanie stood at her gate watching him disappear, wondering what exactly she'd just agreed to and whether she'd made a terrible mistake or finally done something right. When she returned to the house, Riley and Kylie were waiting at the door, their eyes huge with questions they were clearly trying not to ask. Melanie sat down on the floor right there in the foyer, pulled her daughters close, and said the words that changed everything. "That man at the gate is someone who made very big mistakes a long time ago. He hurt me badly before you were born, but he spent years trying to become better, and I think maybe he's earned a chance to meet you both properly. Not as the sick man you helped, but as someone who wants to know you." "Who is he?" Kylie asked, her perception cutting straight to the core. Melanie took a deep breath, knowing this answer would alter their family's entire trajectory. "He's your biological father, and it's complicated. But I think it's time you heard his story directly from him, instead of through my anger." The girls processed this in silence for a moment. Then Riley, with her characteristic optimism, smiled tentatively. "Does this mean we get another person who cares about us?" "Maybe," Melanie allowed. "If he proves he's worthy of caring about you, that's what we're going to find out together." She held her daughters in the foyer, rain still echoing outside, and felt something fundamental shifting in her chest. The fortress walls were cracking, light seeping through fractures she'd kept sealed for years. It was terrifying and liberating simultaneously. The sensation of letting go of a weight she'd grown so accustomed to carrying that she'd forgotten it was optional. Chapter 10: The Love That Survives Everything. Stephen's first supervised visit occurred on a Saturday morning, with autumn sunlight streaming through Melanie's Victorian mansion windows. He arrived exactly on time, his hands trembling as he rang the doorbell, carrying nothing except nervous energy that was almost palpable. Melanie answered. her expression neutral, gesturing him inside without warmth but without active hostility either. Riley and Kylie sat on the living room couch, their faces showing curiosity mixed with understandable anxiety. They'd spent weeks processing the information that this man was their biological father, working through questions with Melanie's careful guidance. "Hi," Stephen said, his voice catching. "I'm Stephen. It's good to see you both again." "Hi," Riley replied, always braver. "Mum says you're our dad, but also that you made really big mistakes and hurt her a lot." Stephen sat in the chair Melanie indicated, keeping physical distance. "That's exactly right. I did hurt your mother terribly. Before you were born, I was told lies about her by someone I trusted, and instead of questioning those lies or believing in your mom, I believed the worst. I said cruel things and sent her away when she needed me most." "Why did you believe the lies?" Kylie asked. "Because I was scared," Stephen admitted. "I was afraid of being used, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of not being good enough. So when someone I trusted told me your mother was lying to me, I took the easy path of believing them instead of the hard path of trusting love. It was cowardly and wrong." The conversation continued gently, Stephen answering every question with careful honesty, never making excuses, taking full ownership of his failures. When the hour ended, Riley had moved slightly closer, while Kylie maintained watchful distance. "Can you come back?" Riley asked as Stephen prepared to leave. "If your mother allows it, I'd like that very much," Stephen replied, looking to Melanie for confirmation. Melanie nodded. "Same time next month." The visits continued through seasons. Slowly, incrementally, Stephen built trust through consistency and honesty. He brought books about families and mistakes and forgiveness. He answered questions about his childhood and current work. He listened far more than he spoke, learning about Riley's love of drawing and Kylie's fascination with science. Melanie watched from her position as guardian and gatekeeper, maintaining boundaries while allowing connection. She saw Stephen gentle with her daughters in ways that created cognitive dissonance with memories of his cruelty. Then, 14 months after the first visit, everything shattered. Riley came home from school crying, clutching a card she wouldn't show Melanie initially. When Melanie finally coaxed it from her daughter's hands, fury detonated in her chest. The card was expensive stationery, the handwriting elegant and unmistakable. "My dear granddaughters," it read, "I'm your father's mother, Constance Gibbs. I've only recently learned of your existence, and I'm devastated we haven't met. Your father has kept you hidden from me, but I want you to know you have family who loves you. Please ask your mother to contact me. We have so much to discuss." Melanie's hands shook with rage. Constance had somehow discovered which school the girls attended, had deliberately circumvented every protection Melanie had established, had reached directly for her daughters, despite explicit warnings. "Did someone give this to you at school?" Melanie asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. "A lady was waiting by the gate," Riley explained through tears. "She said she was our grandmother, and that she'd been looking for us for years. She seemed nice at first, but then she said things about you that made Kylie upset." Kylie stood nearby, her face pale. "She said you were keeping us from our real family. She said we deserved to know the truth about where we came from. She made it sound like you were doing something wrong." Melanie pulled both girls close, her mind racing through legal options and violent impulses simultaneously. She called Stephen immediately, her voice ice when he answered. "Your mother approached my daughters at their school today. She gave them a card. She spoke to them directly, despite knowing she's forbidden from contact." Stephen's sharp intake of breath was audible. "I'll handle this." "Melanie, I swear I didn't know." "I don't care what you knew," Melanie interrupted. "This is exactly what I warned would happen. Your mother is poison, and she just contaminated my daughters. We're done, Stephen. No more visits, no more contact. This experiment is over." She hung up before he could respond, spent the evening comforting her shaken daughters, and lay awake that night, feeling the walls she'd begun dismantling rebuild themselves, brick by brick. Stephen appeared at her door the next morning, looking wrecked. Melanie answered only because Riley and Kylie were at school, because refusing him wouldn't make her rage dissipate. I filed a restraining order against my mother this morning, Stephen said before Melanie could speak. She's legally barred from coming within 500 feet of you or the girls. I've also hired security to monitor their school. This will never happen again. You can't guarantee that, Melanie replied coldly. Your mother has resources and determination and decades of experience manipulating situations. She'll find other ways. Then I'll block every single one, Stephen insisted. Melanie, I've cut her completely out of my life. I haven't spoken to her in over a year. I don't know how she found out about Riley and Kylie's school, but I will discover who told her and eliminate that source. It doesn't matter, Melanie said, exhaustion replacing fury. This is who your family is, toxic and invasive and incapable of respecting boundaries. I was foolish to think we could navigate this safely. My mother is not my family, Stephen countered. Riley and Kylie are my family. You are my family, whether you want to be or not. My mother is a woman I share DNA with, who I've spent years trying to escape. Melanie looked at him, seeing desperation and sincerity warring in his expression. Part of her wanted to slam the door and rebuild every wall. But another part, the part that had been slowly healing, recognized that Stephen hadn't betrayed her trust. His mother had. The girls are terrified, she said finally. Riley cried herself to sleep. Kylie asked me if we have to move to a new city to be safe. You did this, Stephen. Not directly, but by existing, by being connected to that woman, you brought danger to my daughters. I know, Stephen said, his voice breaking. And if the only way to protect them is for me to disappear, I will. But please, let me prove that I can keep them safe from her. Let me show you that my transformation includes protecting what matters from the damage my family causes. Melanie stood in her doorway, every instinct screaming to choose safety over possibility, to choose walls over vulnerability. But Riley's question from months ago echoed in her mind. Don't people change? One more chance, she said finally. But if your mother comes anywhere near my daughters again, if she makes any attempt at contact through any means, you're gone permanently. Understood? Understood, Stephen agreed immediately. The crisis didn't resolve cleanly. Constance hired lawyers attempting to establish grandparents' rights, forcing Stephen to fight legal battles on multiple fronts. She spread rumors through social circles about Melanie's unsuitability as a mother. She sent packages to Melanie's office that security had to screen. Stephen dealt with each attack methodically, documenting everything, building legal cases, exhausting his resources to contain his mother's vindictiveness. Melanie watched him wage this war while maintaining his gentle presence with Riley and Kylie, never letting the stress affect his patience with them. She saw him becoming the barrier between his toxic family history and her daughter's safety. Slowly, over many more months, trust rebuilt. Not easily, not quickly. Melanie had moments where panic would seize her, where she'd want to cancel visits and retreat. But Stephen remained steady, remained consistent, remained exactly who he'd promised to become. On Riley and Kylie's 8th birthday, nearly 2 years after that first supervised visit, Stephen sat on Melanie's porch steps after the celebration ended, watching the girls chase fireflies. I used to imagine futures with you, Stephen said quietly. Before I destroyed everything, I imagined growing old together, raising children, building a life. Those dreams felt dead for years. Melanie sat beside him, maintaining careful distance. They are dead. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. I know, Stephen agreed. But maybe there's a different version, one built on truth instead of illusion. One where we both know exactly who the other person is, including all the broken parts. Melanie watched fireflies rise into darkening sky, feeling something shift in her chest that felt terrifyingly like hope. I'm not ready for anything romantic. I may never be ready. What you did to me doesn't disappear just because you've changed. I understand, Stephen said. I'm not asking for romance. I'm just asking if you think someday, maybe in years from now, we might look at each other and see partners instead of just co-parents. If healing might eventually include that possibility. I don't know, Melanie admitted, the words feeling like both truth and progress. Ask me again in another year, or 2 years, or 5. Maybe by then I'll have an answer. Stephen nodded, accepting the uncertainty. They sat together watching their daughters play, the air fragrant with summer ending and autumn approaching, fireflies rising like wishes into darkness. Melanie didn't promise him anything except this moment, this evening, this tentative possibility that pain didn't have to last forever, and that sometimes, maybe people really could transform into someone worth knowing again.